So I got interested in whether the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system actually relate to these archetypes. You know, that we have this thing called the autonomous nervous system that not only, organizes what our bodies are doing, but it also organizes what we can perceive. You know, isn't it part of the autonomous nervous system is it's sending signals and hormones to our heart and our muscles and our lungs, but it's also organizing our brain and what out of this massive information, what is most important. So I got very curious about that. And what I'm going to share with you is a kind of proposition. It's my main healthy human culture engineering of the complexity of human existence map. So once again, I'm going to share my screen, and I hope it's not too excruciating to see human existence reduced into boxes. Let's get that to work. Okay, so this is my sort of proposition. Number one is that healthy people, healthy beings, have a balance and flow between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. A really good, I think, reframe of sympathetic nervous system. Some people say it's the flight-fight system. What if we said it's the system that mobilizes us? It doesn't have to have any threat in it at all. What if we said that the sympathetic is just what gets us going? It wakes us up. It helps us dance and move and, you know, anything we want to do. And a healthy human will flow between action, which we love, and new challenges and engagement, and engagement and rest and soothing and sleeping and so on. There's a third part of the autonomous nervous system, which is the dorsal vagal, the ventral vagal, that helps us to engage with others. So as social beings, you know, a large part of our existence is about engaging with other people. So this, you know, a healthy human will move between these three states in balance and in flow. And that's a kind of proposition of what we need to be healthy. So in this diagram, I'm going to build up a kind of, you know, this map. If we move to the right, we're putting more stress in the system, and this might be stress over time. Most of the stress of social animals comes not from the predator in the jungle, but from our peers. So most of our stress is from our belonging in the tribe. You know, it's from our relationships with the ones that we depend on. So our first response is always this: engage and negotiate. We'll try and talk our way out of conflict or situations with charge. If we don't manage to negotiate our way out, or it's a sudden shock, a sudden acute threat, then our sympathetic nervous system comes online with flight or fight. We'll run away first. If we can't run away, we'll fight. Of course, as social beings, these get very conditioned, our responses. So this is the emergency sympathetic, and then freeze is our emergency parasympathetic, the dorsal vagal nerve, which just shuts us down, which is our very early evolved lizard-like reptilian brain response. I imagine many of you are familiar with this idea, flight, fight, freeze. It feels like it's more and more spoken about. So this is all a normal part of human existence. We evolved to deal with threats. And for me, this is the crucial part, is what happens after the shock or the fight or the emergency is, do we have what I call return paths that enable us to discharge the residual stress? Right? This for me is like the essence of healthy human culture. And I think if you look, I mean, I'm not an anthropologist, you know, I haven't studied lots and lots of different human cultures, but what I see in the ones that I've met are that there's some kind of return path, some kind of collective process where stress is released and discharged from the body, including emotion, physical release, you know, anything else. You know, I often quote a story from you, Rob, in one of your blogs where you interviewed a grandmother from Standing Rock and asked her, you know, what do you do with people coming back off the front line of that confrontation and tear gassing and water cannons? And she said, we put them in the sweat lodge. It's like, oh, okay, the sweat lodge is a return path. You know, in Sobonfu's tradition, the woman I mentioned that I've learnt a lot from, they do a grief tending ceremony every week, which involves drumming and dancing and music and holding, emotional support, physical contact. So I think there are many, many forms of this return path. They're often rituals, they're often ritualized. And I think in the West, we're starting to grow more of them. So, you know, this might be individual because we're very individual culture therapy, but now somatic therapy, you know, but I think we're also very, very short of collective return paths for processing our pain and our shock. Does that feel true? Isn't it? I didn't experience it when I was a child. I can't think of a single thing where there was a community space where people process pain together. Okay, what happens when the return path fails? So what happens when you're colonized and the elders are killed, or your language is destroyed? What happens if you're a child and you need some kind of a healing process and there is none in your culture? And I think this is what trauma is. I'm just going to share a little bit about trauma because I think there's some unhelpful ways trauma is spoken about. So I'm going to go through this quite quickly. You can always come back and look again or see more in other presentations. Trauma is an injury, but starts with an injury. But if there's a repair, I think there's no trauma. Right? I think that shocking events or violent events where we collectively repair increases our resilience. It increases the belief that we can deal with really difficult stuff and I can trust the people around me. Does that feel true? I know that I'm held in life because when I need it, there are people there who support and hold me to do what I need to do to come back into a state of well-being. So in a healthy culture with return paths, challenges, threats, injuries help us develop and strengthen our sense of community resilience. Trauma occurs when there's no healing, and I think it's a really helpful definition of trauma is to say trauma is an injury that's waiting to be repaired. Isn't it? It's not a kind of terrible, terrible landscape of appalling things that we shouldn't touch. It's simply injuries that have happened that haven't yet been repaired, that are having a lasting effect. So that's one of my things about trauma that I think is really important. It's 2 stages. And the second is that trauma is not an individual issue. Does that make sense? There's always a context. I mean, not sometimes just accidents happened, but most shocking, overwhelming events happen in a social context. Even, you know, people that are dying are often dying of cancer, of kind of environmentally related illnesses, of poverty, of stress, you know, now, not just now, but, you know, throughout time in wars, of violence, of depression, suicide. Like, what's the context in which something happens, and what's the context in which the repair doesn't take place? So I think a really important thing is to stop, you know, it's like the privatizing and the individualizing of the sort of capitalist way of looking at the world. Like, actually, these are collective issues, and part of the reason trauma is always collective is that I can't pull myself back. You know, even if it's only me that's been traumatized, that's got the trauma, I need you or my community to pull me back. I can't do it on my own. Does that make sense? So it's always a landscape. It's always about the failure to repair, the failure of systems to pull people fully back into life. Okay, I'm just going to share these quite briefly. I think this is a helpful model. Again, it's not the truth. That after trauma, there's one part that holds the memory of the trauma. And because it can't be discharged, it goes on walking about in somebody's body, mind, feelings. So It's the part of me that holds that experience of overwhelm, of terror, isolation, often feelings of shame, powerlessness. There was nothing I could do. So that's walking around in my, I know it's there in my body from very early experiences. I think it's there in a lot of our bodies. There's a survival part, and that manages life in a world where there is no repair. You know, if I exist in a cultural landscape where we can't deal with our pain, I've got to find ways of managing life without that basic trust. And finally, the third part is there is still health. You know, there's still the part of us that knows what it feels like to be healthy, to be held by others, that there is love and strength as well as pain and difficulty, and that we do have resources and capacities and ways of integrating. So not everything is just shut down and split off. I think it's really helpful to know that the healthy part is the only part that can create healing or positive change, right? The other parts are basically just managing life. So if we want to create a positive vision for the future, we need to activate the healthy part within us and the healthy part between us. You know, and for me, that's part of what transition has always done, is it's evoked a sense of we do it together. You know, we celebrate what is good, you know, and these are some of the things that I would keep on bringing to meetings. You know, we appreciate the beauty of life. We keep naming and remembering how life nourishes us, you know, the goodness in each other. We keep on being grateful and just saying thank you. Okay, I put these slides in because otherwise I forget, but let's just take a little breath together and check, where are you? So sometimes when I speak about trauma or any of this, it'll, you know, start to activate things in my body, and it may be activating something for you. So just inviting you to take a breath and see if you can feel your feet. It may be helpful to close your eyes and go inside, and that may be really unhelpful. It may be more helpful to just, again, look around the room and see what is there in this room that feels supportive or soothing. How can I know that I'm in this present moment, not somewhere in the past? And that in this moment, I'm, I hope, safe. And I have all I need to be in a state of well-being, however you are today. It may not be perfect, but you know, breathing, supported. And we might even take a moment just to feel, you know, this circle, that we're with other people who are interested and care about this. So glad that I'm not the only one. This really matters to so many people. Just breathing that through. And you might want to just put a hand, if there's anywhere in your body where there's activation, or something that feels soothing. Okay. So I'm just going to keep going through. If you need to stay or move, you know, stay with the settling process or move, please do that. You know, please put self-care on top and follow what your body needs right now. So this last part, there's just a few more minutes of this presentation, and the last part is about this question: can we translate, you know, the sort of neuroscience and the states of consciousness of individuals to culture, you know, to a cultural landscape? And I think this for me is where the archetypes come in. So, you know, something that appears as a kind of organizing principle within me will show up in the culture as an archetype, as an archetypal energy. So, you know, I think there's an archetype around action or strength, outward fire. And there's an archetype around love, being inward, there's digesting, rest, peace, dreaming, the nighttime, the medicine wheel, all that. There are sort of lots of indigenous or traditional technologies that support these archetypes to stay connected and in balance. And I think that these archetypes stay in their health when they're in connection with each other. Does that feel true? Strength stays healthy when it's connected to the heart, not just caring about myself, but caring for all. And love stays healthy when it's connected to strength. I can set boundaries. I don't have to put up with being abused. I'm not just endlessly loving whatever is done to me or whatever I see done to others. Love connected to strength and power. So again, here's our kind of healthy cultural landscape. There's balance and flow between these different states. There's fight, flight, freeze, and there are return paths. So there's a cultural landscape of health. And then this question, what happens to the cultural landscape when there's trauma, not just for a few, but when there's trauma that either builds up over time within the culture, or when there's a traumatizing collective process like war or colonization or, a mass disaster. And this is my sort of proposition, how can you put this in boxes? It's impossible. But some of the things that I see happening are that in unhealthy culture, there's a lot of residual fight and flight. So the emergency states, there's an underpinning of fear because, we can't deal with our pain. Bad things have happened in the past and they weren't repaired. So there's a lot of people walking around with fight-flight activations in their bodies. And this might produce behaviors that, create domination, violence, the sense of entitlement that I can take resources from other parts of the world, or maybe healthy landscapes from people with less power than I have to operate in this landscape. I think a really interesting dynamic is what we do with our own pain. What do I do with my pain, or especially shame? But I think I could have put the word pain in there as well. What if I just put that into your body? I can't deal with it. I'll put it into your body, or I'll put it into the natural landscape. I'll create harm in something else. And you can see, manic action. Some of you talked about that as part of the distortion. Avoidance, I think, avoidance by just walking out of difficult situations. If I've got power, I can do that. Addictions, entertainment, all the way we get really busy and distract ourselves. Isn't it? For me, these are all kind of what I call top right, sort of top right part of the map. Yeah, so we can put our pain, or, and then at the bottom part of the map, the sort of bottom right, there might be a lot of fawning and freezing, which are parasympathetic nervous system responses. And the consequence of this splitting, or, the system of a lot of unhealthy sympathetic, is there are people who now are impoverished, who are stressed and sick, who are carrying a lot of the consequences of this system. So, and some of these, also will be individual people's kind of strategies for managing, placating those with power can be a really unavoidable survival strategy, if you don't have choice around it. So, again, bringing this question, is this true? Do we see things that we recognize, not trying to nail anything down or say that any one version is the truth? So, and clearly this relates to systems of power and privilege. And I think, we can find these dynamics everywhere in the system. I think it's helpful to say, I've got all of this in me. And I could find it in any group that I've been in. There'll be some of this, as well as the health. Important not to forget, we've still got health in the system. Oh, let's not go there yet. But part of what can happen, isn't it, and there's been lots of people looking at it, is that we can split into going, we're the good ones over here, and this is only what other people do. You know, we're the activists, we're trying to change this. It doesn't show up in our movements. I don't think it's helpful. I think it's much more helpful to acknowledge this will certainly show up in our movements, and then ask the question, how can we respond to that in healthy ways? So this last bit of this slide, and then we'll just come on to the what can we do, and let's share our ideas, because I won't have them all. But I think this is really helpful. I don't know, some of you may have come across Resmaa Menakem, who's writing about somatic abolitionism, so very much about the cultural trauma around race, white and black bodies. And he talks about how dirty pain is recycled from one body to another through the system. So instead of healing our pain and using it as a medicine to restore and rebuild and strengthen our communities, which it could be if we're tending it in good ways, dirty pain just gets recycled. And, of course, if you have privilege, you're compensated a bit for the pain in the system, and you can avoid some of it, isn't it? I think one of the dynamics is there can be a belief that having privilege means you haven't been affected by this, but I think we're all affected by it. And I think one of the truths about systems of power and privilege is that those people who are marginalized can see more of the system and often have more experience about navigating its pain. So things like white fragility or male fragility, often start with, in my position, I haven't really had to deal with ongoing challenges and difficulties. Is that true? Not always. So what is needed? If this is our kind of landscape, we've got some health, we've got some unhealth, it's all going on all the time in all of us. These are some of the things that I think are helpful. And, interesting, I think they really relate to Joanna Macy's different parts of the Great Turning. One is just to stop the harm, stop processes of extraction, domination, burnout, avoidance. I think developing the healthy side is really important. How can we develop self and co-regulation? That's what we're doing when we feel our feet on the floor. I'm bringing my nervous system and my body back into a regulated state. So I'm not lost in dysregulation, which is where I may act out difficult emotions in problematic ways. So how can I, I can't remember who it was saying, I've been doing meditation and yoga. These are like muscles. How can I develop those practices of bringing my body back to a state of calm? And then it's accessible when I need it. I think it's good to learn, isn't it? There's just some learning to do. I feel like I'm still learning about systems of privilege. And as a white middle-class woman, what's my what do I know about and what do I not know about, and how do the dynamics work through me? We need to create cultural collective paths from historic shared trauma, isn't it? How do we do that? This is what I was mentioning before. How can we build and strengthen our practices of health? In our meetings, how can we, I can't remember if I left it on here now. How can we put relationships more at the center? So one of the things that I see happening a lot in projects is there's a lot of focus on task, and there's not much time spent. Some of you were mentioning at the beginning, how do we include the heart in our meetings? How do we say we need to keep paying attention and building trust? I'll say a few more things about that in a moment. Listening to marginalized voices, I think, is really important, and that might be the people who are the ones whose voices get heard the least. But also within me, it's often my vulnerability. If I'm a thinking person, I'll probably be marginalizing my feelings, and culturally, the right-hand side likes thinking, isn't it? Thinking is a way of staying out of vulnerability. If I don't touch my feelings and my vulnerability, my pain, my sadness, I can stay away from this bit in the middle, the trauma bit. And that is the thing that I most want to do. I don't want to go back there and feel powerless and shame and helpless and terrified. And staying in my head is a good way of doing that. I think it's helpful to see that culturally there is a shared resistance to doing inner work. And it's, for men, often it's shamed, it's shameful to be vulnerable, to share your tears. For women, we get shamed sometimes for being strong. We get attacked for being too assertive, isn't it? For bringing out anger. And the same could be true around white or black or rich, poor, what's okay behavior for people like me. Okay. I think that's the end. Very good. I'm going to stop sharing. Should we take a breath? Thank you for staying with that.